It can be hard to see God when nature and society are completely silent. In fact, it can be nearly impossible to seek the Lord when everything is so mundane and monotonous. That is where we must turn to his creation, specifically, his creatures. This is what Robert Bresson's 1951 Diary of a Country Priest unveils to audiences. Sanctity in everyday life, repeatedly undermined by a mundane and even malicious society. It provides viewers with the transcendent through the trivial, the spiritual through the small, and faith through the flaws of the flesh. Indeed, as André Bazin puts it, Diary of a Country Priest is a film in which only genuine incidents, the only perceptible movements, are those of the life of the spirit. But how does Bresson evoke these themes? Diary is adapted from the novel of the same name by Georges Bernanos. Bernanos once described his works, including the diary, as means of revealing to certain chosen souls, for whom he believed he had been born, his own understanding of the mysteries of God and man. Bresson himself states something similar, proclaiming that, "I want to make people who see diary feel the presence of God in ordinary life. I don't want to show it too much. I prefer to make people feel it." This intention is assuredly accomplished by the French director. The plot of Diary of a Country Priest affirms this intention. To be as succinct as possible, the film follows an unnamed young priest assigned to the small village of Ambercourt, France. In his diary, which serves as the movie's narration, he records his inexperience, spiritual uncertainty, and worsening physical condition. His parish appears almost entirely indifferent to him. Only one person regularly attends his mass services. The villagers regard him with suspicion, and his mysterious stomach illness confines him to a meager diet of bread, wine, and sugar. From the beginning, his ministry is defined not by visible triumph, but by loneliness, frailty, and apparent failure, all of which is suffered in silence. His ministry gradually draws him into the troubled household of the Count of Ambercourt. The Count is having an affair with Louise, his daughter Chantal's governess. Chantal knows of the affair and despises both her father and Louise, while her mother, the Countess, has alienated herself from her family and from God following the death of her young son. The priest attempts to intervene, but the Count resents his involvement. Louise urges him to leave the parish, and Chantal responds with hostility. When Chantal reveals signs of suicidal intent, the priest forces her to surrender a hidden suicide note. He succeeds in preventing an immediate tragedy, but his severe manner terrifies her, demonstrating the limitations of his earthly ministry. He may recognize another person's suffering without knowing how to express the compassion he feels. The priest's encounter with the Countess becomes the spiritual center of the film. She has preserved her grief as an act of rebellion against God whom she believes took her child. The priest refuses either to condemn her or to offer an easy explanation for her suffering. Instead, he tells her that God is not a torturer and urges her to surrender her hatred, sorrow, and dead child to divine grace. For one brief moment, he breaks through her despair. That evening, the Countess writes to thank him for restoring her peace with God. She dies shortly afterward. Yet, even this apparent miracle is misunderstood. Chantal claims that the priest tormented her mother, and the Count begins working to remove him from the parish. Rather than defend himself by producing the Countess's letter, the priest silently accepts the suspicion around him. His greatest spiritual accomplishment therefore remains almost entirely invisible to the society around him. Meanwhile, his health continues to erode. After vomiting blood, he travels to Lille and learns that he has terminal stomach cancer. He seeks refuge with an old companion, a former seminarian who abandoned the priesthood and now lives outside the church's teachings. As the young priest approaches death, he pleads with the ex-priest Dufresne to provide him with last rites. When Dufresne doubts whether he can properly administer them, the dying priest answers with the film's final and most profound declaration.
Qu'est-ce que cela fait? Tout est grâce.
In all, his life has appeared to consist of illness, social ostracization, failed communication, and spiritual doubt. Yet Bresson gradually reveals that grace operates through precisely these apparent failures. The priest does not conquer Ambercourt, reform its inhabitants, or receive recognition for his sacrifices. He simply suffers among them, occasionally illuminating lives that the world has otherwise abandoned. His sainthood is not found beyond the ordinary, but concealed within it. What does the use of Bresson's ordinary priest and his ordinary life mean to us ordinary people? In short, his focus on the ordinary makes diary spiritual without being saturated with religiosity. This attention to the ordinary is manifested through the Ambrecourt priest and the flock that has forsaken him. As said, the little priest is met with hostile indifference, even told in a note to get out. His prized student mocks him, giggling and running off to her classmates, leaving him alone. He is even belittled by his beloved mentor, who puts little faith in him. The cause of the villagers' cruelty may be their material poverty. Their extreme indigence leads them to resent those in higher social positions, such as the priest. An old widower, in fact, tells the sorrowful priest,
Ben non, vous autres. Faudrait pas pour ça profiter de la misère de personne. Il est un peu vite gagné, votre argent, monsieur le curé.
This comes after the priest informs him of the price of his wife's funeral. But this material pauperism is not the only way the villagers exhibit their contempt. Perhaps even more importantly, they suffer from spiritual poverty, a loss of faith in transformation, whether on earth or in heaven. We resent, bicker, and fail to forgive, just as those in Ambrecourt. The priest attempts to understand, and even takes on these blows, just as Christ did during his trial. Perhaps we too should be like the little priest in this way. Another key mechanism of the priest's suffering is his intense stomach pain. His stomach barely tolerates bread and sugared wine, which backfires on him as he is accused of being a drunkard. With all of these factors weighing on the father of Ambrecourt, it is no surprise that the priest develops severe depression. His quiet despair materializes one night when, plagued by insomnia, he attempts to pray. He recognizes the necessity of this prayer, like the need for air in his lungs, but for some odd reason, perhaps due to the alienation, illness, or despair, he cannot. He writes,
Derrière moi, il n'y avait rien. Et devant moi, un mur noir. Il n'y a pas d'obstacle. Rien.
We reach the key premise of this film and commentary. That is, the transcendent through the trivial. Amid the priests and the village's spiritual desolation, Christian transcendence becomes a striking reality. The priest experiences transcendence primarily through grace. His first encounter with grace is his observation of the Countess's conversion, a woman marked by detachment from her family, chiefly after the death of her son. The Countess first finds his insistence revolting, as she dismisses her daughter Chantal's suicidal ideation and her husband's infidelities. As the priest presses her to confront her pride and grief, the Countess becomes more defiant. She asserts that God no longer matters to her, claiming her hatred for the Lord. Gaining a revelatory epiphany, the priest comprehends the depth of the mother's injury and the loss of her child. He rises and delivers an impassioned speech about how, out of compassion for human suffering, Christ entered the world and was crucified. Feeling that her pain has been recognized, the Countess responds.
Que voulez-vous que je lui dise?
Our pious priest answers.
Que votre règne arrive, que votre volonté soit faite.
He transforms in this moment from a pastor attempting to convert into a shepherd guiding wounded sheep into the comfort of the fold. Yet her resistance has not fully disappeared. She tells the priest,
Quelque part en ce monde ou dans l'autre, un lieu où Dieu ne soit pas. Dussé-je souffrir 1000 morts à chaque seconde, éternellement. J'y emporterai mon fils. Et je dirai à Dieu, satisfais-toi, écrase-nous.
Still responding with compassion, the priest tells her that he has felt like her many times, as evidenced by his journal. Now realizing the shared suffering between the two, the Countess hurls her precious medallion of her dead son into the fire. She falls to her knees, prostrating herself before sorrow, covering her face with her hands. The stone of her resentment has crumbled. The priest concludes by blessing her as he leaves. After the sequence concludes, the Countess sends him a letter filled with gratitude.
Tout est bien. Je ne croyais pas la résignation possible. Mais ce n'est pas la résignation qui est venue en effet. Je ne suis pas résignée, je suis heureuse. Je ne désire rien.
Bresson gives this transformation its power through the most ordinary sounds and images. At key moments of the conversation, there is a whisper of raking in the background, with the camera shifting twice to the outside of the window. As Paul Schrader points out, Bresson's transcendental techniques demonstrate the stark contrast between surface reality and mystical events, accentuating the film's emotional impact. A second encounter with Grace occurs when the priest's illness becomes almost unbearable. After fainting, he struggles to stand before an image of the Blessed Virgin. The words of the priest of Torcy return to him. Mary was not only the mother of mankind, but also a daughter, a child held and protected by the ancient world before Grace. The priest imagines the hand of a sublime creature reaching towards him. Yet Bresson does not include this moment with a spectacular apparition. The priest later awakens on straw, while Seraphita, one of the very children who had mocked him, gently cleans his face. The connection is unmistakable. The hand of the Virgin is realized through the hand of another human being. Marian tenderness becomes embodied in an ordinary act of care. This does not mean that Seraphita simply becomes a literal symbol and ceases to be herself. Rather, her compassion reveals that divine grace does not need to descend upon the world as something foreign to it. It can pass through a creature. The supernatural is disclosed through touch, vulnerability, and the unexpected mercy of someone who had previously caused pain. The priest cannot save his own body. He must be lifted, carried, washed, and led to safety. His dependence is not a humiliation separate from grace. It becomes the means through which grace reaches him. By the film's end, the priest is close to death, yet Bresson refuses to stage his cancer diagnosis as a conventional dramatic revelation. We do not hear the specialist deliver the verdict. We learn it afterward through the diary, as though even death must first pass through the priest's interior life before it becomes available to us. He visits Dufresne, his former seminary companion, not because Dufresne represents religious perfection, but because he remains, however fallen, a priest. The little priest's final hope does not rest upon the moral purity of the person beside him. It rests upon the possibility that grace can work through an imperfect instrument. Dufresne worries that he cannot properly give absolution. The dying priest dismisses the fear, saying, "What does it matter? All is grace." The sentence does not mean that suffering is pleasant, that cruelty is harmless, or that every action is equally good. It means that human weakness cannot place us beyond the reach of God. Grace is not a reward granted only after we have achieved supernatural competence. It reaches the sick priest, the embittered countess, the mocking child, and even the fallen clergyman. The final declaration also transforms everything that came before it. The priest's illness was not evidence that God had abandoned him. His failure to reform Ambrecourt did not make his vocation meaningless. His inability to communicate perfectly did not prevent him from becoming an instrument of consolation. Even his doubt did not place him outside of grace. Bresson ends not by showing us the priest's face in triumphant certainty, but by leaving us with his death recounted through another person's letter and the stark image of the cross. The individual disappears, but the spiritual reality he has embodied remains. Diary of a Country Priest is quiet, severe, and almost militantly uninterested in pleasing its audience. Yet its austerity is what allows it to pierce so deeply. Bresson strips away spectacle until a glance, a sound, a piece of writing, or a hand upon a face acquires enormous spiritual weight. The film does not demand that every viewer describe this presence as God, but even for those outside the Catholic or even Christian faith, it makes ordinary reality difficult to dismiss as spiritually empty. It asks us to consider whether suffering and grace, despair and tenderness, can occupy the same unremarkable moment. The priest dies believing that his ministry has largely been unsuccessful. Yet the film allows us to see what Ambrecourt could not. His weakness was never separate from his vocation. Through the sick body, the misunderstood blessing, the hidden letter, the sound beyond the window, and the hand extended in darkness, grace has already entered the ordinary. The little priest does not escape suffering. He discovers, finally, that suffering has not expelled him from the love of God.